The New Zealand landscape's amazing, fascinating, and sometimes surprising. In 2009, Jenny Stein, a geology student, was looking for any sign of fossils. Trevor Copland, a local farmer, thought she was in trouble. But when he discovered she was a geology student, he wanted to show her something he discovered. Trevor's farm, Cozy Dell, is located at Waimumu, 140 kilometres from the coast. Above ground, his farm is full of exotic Arabian horses. But it turned out that below ground, there was something equally exotic.
Because the farm sits on coal, it is very hard to drain. And so when you're draining coal, you have to always go a little bit further. Grandad always said, go an extra chain and you'll always be better off in coal, you know, to get rid of the water properly. So we dug up through a coal seam and we were about to stop, and I went, no, we a bit further. And next thing, when we struck the shell bed, it was very sparkly. It all just glistened in the sun and was sparkly and had a lot of shells in it, and we were didn't really know what it was.
But a professor at the University of Otago thought she did. For Dr. Daphne Lee, the fossils are a passion, and over the years she has collected a range of unique fossils that reveal secrets about our past.
With a microlight to just fly around.
Secrets she now shares with her university students. Since 2009, Dr. Daphne has been absolutely focused on the fossils found under Cozy Dell Farm. And that means that students like Henry got drawn to the location and involved in the research. His work is helping Daphne to unravel the mystery.
Cozy Dell is really important because it's one of the very few fossilised rocky shore sites we have in New Zealand. I'm interested in rocky shores, and I've looked at a few others, but in New Zealand I think there are 3 or 4 of Oligocene age, and in the world altogether there are only about 10 or 12. So New Zealand has got some of the, more rocky shores than almost anywhere else in the world. And the thing about rocky shores is that they represent a coastline, and that means there was sea on one side, but there must have been land on the other side.
And Cozy Dell is a very rich fossil site. They have discovered 350 different fossilised shells. What these fossils reveal is that probably there were subtropical islands 24 million years ago.
When the sea came in, New Zealand had been reduced to a series of quite large islands, and probably the Hokonui Hills in the distance behind us were one of those islands, but the biggest one of all, just nearby, is over in that direction to the east, and it's called the Catlins Block, and that was certainly above sea level. And altogether we think in this part of New Zealand there was a land area about the same size as present-day New Caledonia, so maybe 25,000 square kilometres was still above sea level. So what we have here is the coastline of one of those islands.
But coming to that conclusion wasn't easy. They needed to piece together a gigantic puzzle. That involved removing the sand that had been embedded in these shells for millions of years. A delicate touch is required if the fossil is not to be damaged. And when necessary, shells are glued together to preserve the evidence.
It took us a while to try and work out what was going on here, because there was a whole variety of different fossils. There was big pieces of wood, there was big shells. Some of the shells were this size, they were really huge, and it's one of the most diverse fossil localities in New Zealand, and it's got all sorts of fossils that have not ever been found anywhere else. There's huge oysters about this size.
Fossils like this provide evidence that there were small islands during the Oligocene.
They probably weren't very big, but altogether they probably were about the size of New Caledonia. Now, New Caledonia, if you look at it on the map, is only a fairly small little patch of land in the middle of a big ocean, but it's got a nice warm climate and it's got a very, very diverse flora and a really interesting fauna living on it. So you don't need much land to have a very diverse biota. So very diverse, plant and animal communities and so on. And I think even though New Zealand in the Oligocene was reduced to relatively small islands, there was still a great diversity of plants and animals living there.
At the end of the Cretaceous era, 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs were extinct. During the Oligocene, 24 million years ago, the sea level rose. And it turns out to be important because there has been an argument going on over our geological past for some time.
A topic of hot debate in New Zealand for the last 10 years or so has been how much land there was in the Oligocene. So we know that when New Zealand separated from Gondwana about 83 million years ago, it was a huge area of land and it slowly subsided beneath the sea. So the land kind of shrank and sank down, and some people have suggested that perhaps it sank completely, and then once a new plate boundary had come into being, then it started to be uplifted again. Now, if that was true, all of what we see in New Zealand today, all the plants and all the animals, everything, all the forest trees, the things like tuatara, the moas, which of course are extinct but we're here, and we've got a whole lot of peculiar things like unusual frogs and so on, would all have had to come and recolonise a new island that emerged from the sea. Now, I found that really, really hard to believe. I think there's always been land in New Zealand, but some people, including my colleague Hamish Campbell, who has written a couple of books about this. This one's called In Search of Ancient New Zealand, and in it he says, and I'll just have a look, he says that if Zealandia, that's New Zealand, was completely inundated 23 million years ago, which he believes, could there have been some islands? And he says there's no evidence for islands. He means there's no evidence for land anywhere. And so I've been really interested with my colleagues in finding evidence for land, which means tracing the fossil shorelines. And so here, without doubt, we have a fossil shoreline which is almost exactly the age that he said that there was no land.
After years of work, a book that collects years' worth of research has been published.
Issue of the New Zealand Journal of Geology and Geophysics, which is the main publication on New Zealand geology that comes out 4 times a year. And last year in 2014, they asked a whole lot of people to write papers to see whether or not we could prove whether or not there was land during the Oligocene. And so there are about a dozen papers, and not one single one of them thinks that New Zealand was completely submerged. So I think we've actually won the debate.
A chance discovery uncovered what lay beneath these fields. It makes you wonder what other secrets the land has yet to reveal.
Okay.
Let's wind it that.